Oh, man. How insane have cancel culture and identity politics become? And how hypocritical can one of the pop news media outlets actually get? Well, we can get the latest development. A New York Times journalist was just fired for uttering the N-word in a chat about the propriety of using the N-word. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. Well, it's finally happened. After nearly a week of attention and hand-wringing, the New York Times on Friday, February 5th, finally booted former science writer Donald McNeil Jr., a 45-year vet in the field of so-called journalism. His transgression? According to McNeil, on a trip with students, he repeated the N-word when answering a question from a teen who asked him about the propriety of using the N-word in a video. Matt Welch reports for Reason. Under public pressure from more than 150 employees, the New York Times decided that when it comes to speaking certain radioactive words, not only does intent not matter, any utterance is potentially a one-strike offense. We do not tolerate racist language regardless of intent, Times executive editor Dean Baquet and managing editor Joe Kahn explained bluntly in a memo Friday. Kahn! 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 That's awesome. And so they've canceled McNeil. Reports The Guardian, 6 students or parents complained to the paper following the trip, which was part of the Times Student Journeys program, for which participation typically costs over $5,000. I pay $5,000 to get away from the New York Times. Please leave me alone. Here, I'll pay you. Which begs the obvious question, who in the world would pay the New York Times $5,000 for anything, let alone traveling to a distant country in the company of some of the leftist staff members of the paper? In a February 5th apology reposted by New York Times media reporter Mark Tracy, McNeil offers a farewell and his side of the story, which reads, in part, on a 2019 New York Times trip to Peru for high school students, I was asked at dinner by a student whether I thought a classmate of hers should have been suspended for a video she had made as a 12-year-old in which she used a racial slur. To understand what was in the video, I asked if she had called someone else the slur or whether she was rapping or quoting a book title. In asking the question, I used the slur itself. Which shows that McNeil just isn't too hip on how the censorious American culture works nowadays. See, no one can utter that word, period, unless he or she is blessed with the protection of being a certain subset of the population granted permission due to, you got it, race. Others can't mention it, or even repeat it, or even read books like Huckleberry Finn, which utilizes it in the context of showing a white boy and a black boy becoming friends during a time when that term was in wider use and racism was much more rampant than today. And yes, by the way, some leftist panty waists are wondering if publishers should slice up Twain's masterpiece to remove the evil word. Even though, of course, friendship across racial boundaries is actually one of the key themes of the stinking book. Eventually, the politically correct replacement for the word, currently the common parlance term N-word, might also be used by wily racists, which will see the hand-wringers eventually banish that very term to the cornfield as well. It'll go into the coffin of lexicography, and some replacement for that word will then be used, and so on, until eventually all options are spent, all words are banished, and the world goes silent so as not to offend anyone over anything whatsoever. McNeil went on with his walk down the gauntlet of shame, writing, I should not have done that. Originally, I thought the context in which I used the ugly word could be defended. Now I realize that it cannot. It is deeply offensive and hurtful. The fact that I even thought I could defend it itself showed extraordinarily bad judgment. For that, I apologize. What a circus. Bunch of clowns. clownish behavior. Unbelievable. And they're probably nice people. It's like, geez, you guys, what the heck? That's politics just gets everybody at each other's throats. It's so stupid. Gosh, just leave people alone. And McNeil went on to direct his apology to the students, his colleagues, and the institution of the Times itself. Well, it took over a week to get to this self-loathing, butt-covering, censorious point. Initially, as Breitbart's John Nolte reported at the time, the Times issued an apology. But as Nolte noted, the Times report on its own apology was so opaque as to be vacant of any real information. Quote, the Times' piece on the Times displacing a Times reporter doesn't even tell us what the Times reporter said. All we're told is that it was a racial slur, but we're not given the context of his use of the racial slur other than repeating a racist slur in the context of a conversation about racist language. Painfully childish doesn't begin to describe the depth to which New York Times decision makers and many on staff are behaving. But it's reflective of the greater part of the identity politics left, who actually use cancel culture as a weapon to shut down dissent from their grow the state mantra. As Reasons Welch explains, this week the newsroom revolted via a remarkable group letter in which more than 150 staffers at one of the country's leading newspapers argued that word choice intentions are irrelevant because, quote, what matters is how an act makes the victims feel, end quote. Signees declaring themselves, quote, outraged and in pain, end quote, and disrespected, end quote, demanded a reinvestigation of the 2019 incident, an apology to the newsroom, and an organizational study on how racial biases affect editorial decisions. This is so stupid, which is why it's happening at the New York Times. It's perfect. And if what matters is how an act makes the victim feel, that assumes that repeating a word for intellectual purposes as part of an investigation into the ethics of using said word is a violent act, which it isn't. It also tells us that in the bizarro world of these staffers, no words can be used because at any time, anyone could be hurt by any word. Well, of course, McNeil is now canceled, but as I mentioned in a piece about how old guard leftists who promoted their own form of cancel culture for decades were being canceled by new cancelers, this kind of mindset leads to perpetual cancellation and a lingua nihilo, language made of nothing. In fact, McNeil himself was guilty of engaging in his own molten call to cancel in May last year, when he lashed out at Trump's CDC director, Dr. Robert Redfield, and called for him to resign. One need not support Redfield or the unconstitutional CDC to recognize that what is curious here is that McNeil's actions at the time merely inspired the bigwigs at the New York Times to say that he went too far and give him a little talking to. They continued to allow him to be a so-called reporter, and from what can be gleaned from available information, that concerned gaggle of 150 of his cohorts at the paper didn't call for him to be canceled. It took McNeil evidently repeating that word after it was said to him in a conversation about what's okay to say. That is what got him. This is becoming absurd, and Welch puts it perfectly. Quote, you can get suspended from university jobs for even saying words that sound like a racial slur but are not. Placing that level of consequence-heavy fraughtness on speech does not encourage productive conversations about negative collective demonization of certain groups based on their immutable characteristics. And that's because the collectivists want to engage in collective demonization of any group or individual who might stand in their way of linguistic control. Because linguistic control offers more leverage to gain political control over others. It's that simple. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Remember, like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. We'll see you on Rumble. We'll see you in Facebook. Yes, The goodness gracious great overlords of Facebook have welcomed me back. How fantastic. Now I can get banned again. And I'll see you also over on Twitter. Remember, visit us on Twitter as much as possible, and please remember to go to MRCTV.org, because if anything happens on social media, that is your central locus where you can always find the whole team. And please, if you get the opportunity, go to MRC-Store, Media Research Center store, where you can get all sorts of great swag. For MRCTV.